It's around 750 CE. You're standing in a bustling city carved out of the dense jungle, somewhere in the southern lowlands, maybe Copan or Yaxchilan. The sun is barely up, piercing through the thick canopy, and the humidity is already wrapping around you like a wet blanket. Down the plastered white stucco street, men are gathering for the walk to work. Because this neighborhood exists for exactly one reason. These are the master carvers and masons who build the towering limestone pyramids and carve the stelae of the Kuhul Aja, the Holy Lords. And standing off to the side is an AJ Zib, a scribe of the elite class, holding a brush, an ink pot of crushed black soot, and a long fold of bark paper, taking a census for the day's tribute labor. Because even 2,300 years ago, somebody was tracking your productivity. Now, unlike the ancient Egyptians, the Maya didn't leave us a single perfectly preserved rocky HR record of daily absences. In 1562, a Spanish friar named Diego de Landa burned almost every Maya book in existence, destroying thousands of years of recorded history in a single afternoon. But from the 4 codices that survived, the thousands of painted ceramics, the carved monuments, and the deep ethno-historic traditions of the Maya descendants, we can reconstruct the reality of daily life. And we know that when a woman in a Maya household stepped away from her daily back-breaking quota of grinding maize or weaving cotton, it wasn't a mystery. It was often because she was touched by the moon. So today we're going to Mesoamerica, just the Maya. Not a highlight reel of human sacrifice or a tour of alien conspiracy theories about the pyramids. One civilization in depth. We're going to get into the cotton, the sweat baths, the sacred almanacs, a diagnostic test involving red seeds, a goddess who controlled both weaving and the cosmos, and the fundamental concept of blood that quietly reframes the entire subject. Let's go. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the ancient Maya. We know an absurd amount about the elite and almost nothing about the ordinary. We know exactly when a king went to war. We can track the cycle of Venus down to the decimal point across thousands of years. We know their recipes for frothy, spicy chocolate. We have a civilization obsessed with time, mathematics, and mapping the stars, building stone monuments in a rainforest, which is the single worst environment for keeping delicate things preserved. And yet, if you go looking for a clear, direct, unambiguous answer in the hieroglyphs to what a Maya woman physically used during her period, you will not find one. There is no carved lintel that says, "Here is how you do it." There's no painted vase of it. The Maya painted lords smoking tobacco. They painted musicians playing turtle carapaces. They painted terrifying underworld gods decapitating people. But not this. That gap exists because of who was holding the brush. Maya scribes were exclusively elite, usually men, writing for dynastic purposes, propaganda, royal lineages, war victories, and rituals. Nobody carves a 20-ton stone monument to write down the stuff everybody already knows. You have never once commissioned a bronze plaque explaining how to use a doorknob. So what we're doing for the rest of this is detective work. We're assembling the answer out of side evidence, materials, ethnohistory, magic, labor, and the defining religion of the Maya world. And the picture that emerges is much stranger and much better than you'd expect. To understand anything about the body in the ancient Maya world, you have to understand one fundamental word: Xulel. Xulel is the sacred life force. It is the soul, the energy that makes the universe run. And for the Maya, Xulel was contained in blood. Maya religion was magnificently obsessed with blood, but not in a horror movie way. In a deeply reciprocal, cosmic way. The gods bled to create humanity, so humans had to bleed to keep the gods alive, the sun moving and the rains falling. The kings and queens performed auto-sacrifice. A holy lord would pierce his genitals with a stingray spine, and a queen would pull a rope threaded with obsidian thorns through her tongue, dropping the blood onto bark paper to be burned, sending the smoke to the ancestors. Blood was the ultimate currency of power. So, when a woman bled naturally every month, it was not sorted into a conceptual drawer labeled filthy contamination. It was sorted into a drawer labeled immense, uncontrollable cosmic power. In many traditional Maya communities, menstruation is deeply tied to the moon. The moon dictates the tides, the planting of crops, and the bodies of women. A menstruating woman was often considered hot in the Mesoamerican hot-hold ideological system. She was spiritually charged. Her blood was so powerful it could supposedly dull a man's machete, ruin a hunting trip, or cure an illness. This wasn't about her being a bad, dirty person. It was about her carrying a localized spiritual lightning storm. Approaching daily tasks with that kind of energy required careful management. Okay, practical question. What was the material? You will read on various corners of the internet that ancient Mesoamerican women used corn husks or agave leaves as tampons. I want to be straight with you. That claim is mostly modern imagination. While Maggie agave fiber was heavily used, nobody was putting raw, scratchy corn husks inside their bodies. The much better supported answer is boring, and it's cotton. Taman, the ancient Maya, were a cotton civilization in a way that's hard to overstate. Cotton was the great cash crop of the lowlands. Cotton production was an enormous industry, exclusively run by women, from the spinning of the thread on clay spindle whorls to the weaving on backstrap looms. Cotton textiles were clothing. Cotton was currency. Literally, standardized woven blankets called mantas were used to pay taxes and tribute. Cotton was what you wrapped your dead elites in. And critically, Maya cotton came in grades. There was the incredibly fine, sheer, brightly dyed stuff worn by queens, and there was the coarse, everyday cloth. And at the very end of a garment's life, when it had been worn and patched until it was just a fraying rag, it found its final purpose. Since we know women spent hours a day weaving, the technology of folding soft, absorbent cotton or barkcloth rags is just basic logic. Folded cotton pads, held by a woven sash, worn, washed in the river or the local cenote, limestone sinkhole, dried in the baking tropical sun, and used again. When it completely fell apart, it was discarded. Nothing in a demanding agricultural economy gets thrown away prematurely. Now let's talk about what Maya healers thought was going on. Since Landa burned the books, we don't have a 3,000-year-old gynecological codex, but we do have the colonial-era ritual of the Bacabs, and centuries of fiercely protected ethnobotanical knowledge preserved by traditional midwives, Ayam. Maya medicine is startlingly practical, deeply herbal, and built around temperature balance. If you had debilitating cramps, a Maya healer didn't theorize about a wandering womb like the Greeks. They diagnosed a cold imbalance in the abdomen. The primary medical treatment was the Pib'naah, the sweat bath. Almost every Maya city and many ordinary households had a stone sweat bath. This wasn't just a sauna. Ritually, it was the womb of the earth. Women dealing with severe menstrual pain or recovering from childbirth would go into the intense, herbal steam heat of the Pib'naah to purify their bodies, relax their muscles, and restore the heat they were losing. They also used genuinely effective botanicals. Copal resin for spiritual cleansing, infusions of specific barks and yarrow to staunch heavy bleeding, and cacao, which we now know is packed with magnesium, genuinely helping with cramps, served as a warm, sacred drink. I have to tell you about how Maya midwives handled pregnancy, because it mirrors the ingenuity of the ancient world. Without a modern hormonal test, Maya midwives relied on deep physical observation and divination. A skilled Ayam would visit a woman who missed her moon time. She wouldn't use barley like the Egyptians. Instead, she would feel the woman's abdomen to find the pulsation, the specific throb of the blood. Mesoamerican midwives observed over thousands of years that the pulse of the body shifts uniquely during early pregnancy. If the physical signs weren't clear, the midwife would pull out her divination bag. She would cast tzit seeds, red coral beans, and count them out in groups, mapping them against the sacred 260-day calendar, the Tzolk'in, to ask the ancestors if the woman was carrying a child. Is casting beans a scientific chemical test? No. But the physical palpation of the abdomen, combined with tracking the woman's exact missed cycle on an incredibly sophisticated calendar, resulted in highly accurate early pregnancy detection. Notice what this implies about menstruation. It implies Maya women were tracking. It implies a late period was a known, recognized critical signal, and there was a documented social and medical procedure for figuring out what it meant. Let's go back to that household in Copan. In the Maya world, daily survival hinged on one brutal task: the grinding of nixtamalized maize on a stone metat. A woman spent anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day on her knees, grinding corn into dough, masa, to feed her family. It was back-breaking, exhausting work that physically deformed the knee and toe bones of Maya women over a lifetime. If a woman was in the heaviest days of her cycle, deeply fatigued and spiritually hot, there are ethno-historic accounts suggesting she would temporarily step away from the fire and the food prep. Which brings up a fascinating reality. Who ground the corn? If the woman of the house couldn't do it, someone else had to. A sister, a daughter, or occasionally a husband. The state demanded monuments, the gods demanded blood, but the stomach demanded maize. A woman's cycle was an undeniable physical reality that the household economy simply had to accommodate. It wasn't an anomaly. It was the cost of having a family. There's one more piece, and it's beautiful. In the Maya pantheon, the deity who ruled over the moon, menstruation, childbirth, and medicine was Ix Chel, often referred to as Goddess O. She is frequently depicted holding a rabbit, pouring water from a jug, or sitting at a backstrap loom. Think about that combination. Weaving is the creation of order from raw material. Childbirth is the creation of life. The moon is the celestial clock. For the Maya, a woman's menstrual cycle wasn't just a biological inconvenience. It was a microcosmic reflection of Ix Chel's cosmic rhythm. When a woman bled, she was physically syncing with the moon goddess. In a civilization where the rains meant the difference between feasting and starvation, where the cyclical movement of the stars dictated when kings went to war, a woman's cycle was just another of the universe's great divine clocks. It wasn't something to be cured, it was something to be respected. Now here's the part that changes the question. Everything up to now has been about how. Materials, sweat baths, divination, goddesses. But there's a question hiding underneath all of it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. How often did this actually happen? A modern woman in a wealthy country with excellent nutrition and a completely different reproductive timeline will menstruate roughly 400 times in her life. We assume this is just the default background rhythm of a female body. An ancient Maya woman's number was nowhere near that. Start with menarche. The onset of menstruation is strongly tied to body fat and nutrition. In a pre-industrial society relying heavily on seasonal maize, periods started later, then marriage, which happened shortly after menarche, then pregnancy, and another pregnancy, and another. In a society with high infant mortality where large families were required to work the fields, then critically, breastfeeding. The Maya nursed their children for 3 to 4 years, supplementing with maize gruel. Extended, constant breastfeeding strongly suppresses ovulation, lactational amenorrhea. Stack it up. A later start, immediate marriage, repeated pregnancies, 3 to 4 years of nursing between each one, a shorter overall life expectancy. Do the math, and it comes out to maybe a few dozen menstrual periods across an entire lifetime. We've been asking how an ancient Maya woman managed her period as though it were a constant, monthly logistical nightmare. For a great many Maya women, it wasn't the rhythm at all. It was the interruption. It was the rare thing that showed up in the small gaps between pregnancies and years of nursing. And when it did show up, it carried an immense amount of information. It meant not pregnant. In a society where children were your labor force, your security in old age, and the ones who would burn offerings to keep your soul alive in the underworld, that was massive news. We've been reading the lack of glyphs about periods as a gap in the record. It's not a gap, it's the answer. The logistics were solved. It was cotton rags and a wash in the cenote. Everybody knew that. They didn't write it down because the signal was what mattered, not the fabric. Let's take a step back. What does the full picture tell us? First, the material was never the problem. The Maya were drowning in cotton. The physical challenge of absorbing flow was solved thousands of years before the first pyramid was built, using whatever was locally abundant. Second, the category was everything. The Maya sorted menstruation into the conceptual bin of Kulel, sacred power, heat, and lunar alignment. Compare that to societies that sorted it into the contamination bin, and you get vastly different psychological realities for the women living through it. Third, I don't want to oversell the ancient Maya as a feminist utopia. It was a strictly hierarchical, often brutal society. Women were generally excluded from supreme political rule, with a few spectacular exceptions like Lady Six Sky, and the peasant woman working the milpa, cornfield, lived a grueling life of physical labor that ground her bones down. Fourth, we only know any of this by piecing together fragments. A colonial dictionary entry, a bone needle found in an archaeological dig, a traditional midwife in the highlands of Guatemala today, quietly practicing the exact same abdominal massage her ancestors did 2,000 years ago. The Kuhul Aja, the Holy King, wanted to be remembered forever. He forced thousands of people to drag limestone blocks through a sweltering jungle to build a temple, specifically to make sure you'd still be looking at his name today. And we do. But we also, through the surviving shape of a clay spindle whirl, the charred stones of a sweat bath, and the living traditions of the Maya people, remember the woman who ground his corn. Nobody carved her name into a stela, but she was the one perfectly aligned with the moon. Turns out that was enough. So, question for you. Of everything in your life right now, all the digital traces and the mundane objects, what is the one totally accidental thing you'd want to survive 1,300 years into the future?